Hello friends, this is Sanjay. In this video, we'll talk about gender as a social construct. We'll discuss about gender roles, gender bias and educational practice, which is part of the Karnataka TET CDP syllabus for paper 1 and paper 2. As usual, we will cover only those topics which are important from your exam point of view. We'll start with understanding what is sex and what is gender, what is the difference between these two terms. We'll look at some theories on gender role development. We will talk about gender socialization, roles and role typing, stereotypes, bias, prejudice and discrimination, inequality, equality and equity, and gender implications in educational practices. We will also look at gender bias in the classroom. We will end this video by solving some sample questions from previous question papers. So let's get started. Let us start off by understanding sex versus gender. What is the difference between these two terms? Sex refers to the biological construct of a person. That is, when a child is born, the child is either born with XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes. If the child is born with XY, then the child will be called a male. And if the child is born with XX chromosomes, then the child will be called a female. So, sex is a biological construct. Gender is the social expectation of what this male should be like or what this female should be like. For example, we expect boys to behave in a certain way. We may expect girls to behave in a certain way. So that is a social construct. So gender is a social construct, whereas sex is a biological construct. A simple example is if you have heard somebody say that boys should not cry or men should not cry, or if you have heard statements like this work is not for girls, then those are examples of gender. That is because the society expects the male or the female to behave in a certain way. So this is the difference between sex and gender. Let us look at a couple of important theories on gender role development. So what is this gender role development? Well, at some point the child realizes that he or she is male or female, and then the child learns what is expected from him or her in terms of behavior or in terms of dressing up just because he or she is male or female. So how does the child learn this? So that is gender role development. That is, what is their role as expected by the society just because of their sex. That is gender role. Albert Bandura talks about gender role development as part of his social learning theory itself. He says that children learn about gender roles by watching and imitating models. For example, a little girl may watch her mother or other elder females in the family in terms of how they behave, how they dress up, and imitate them. And that's how the child will learn about her gender role. Similarly, a boy may imitate his father or other elder males in the family, and that's how the boy will learn about his gender role expectation. Lawrence Kohlberg talks about gender role development in the cognitive development theory itself. In fact, he positions gender role development as part of Jean Piaget's cognitive development theory, because he says that this gender role development actually happens between the pre-operational and the concrete operational stage. And he says that this gender role development happens through three distinct steps. He calls them gender identity, gender stability, and gender constancy. In gender identity, children realize that there is a particular difference between them and others because of their sex. That is, they start to identify what is their gender. They start realizing that there are some biological and external differences which is inherent between males and females. But still, the children think that if they behave like a different sex, their gender can be changed. That is, if a girl behaves like a boy, she will become a boy. So that is the expectation at this age. At the next stage, they reach gender stability. That is, children begin to realize that irrespective of how they behave, because of their sex, their gender cannot be changed. And then there is a stage of gender constancy. That is when children realize that their gender is fixed and there is a specific expectation from them because of their sex. And that expectation can be called gender. That is, because a boy is male, the society expects him to behave in a particular way. And because a girl is a female, the society expects her to behave and dress in a particular way. So at gender constancy, that's when children begin to understand what is their gender role. So these are the 3 steps that Lawrence Kohlberg talks about. The next term that we'll talk about is gender socialization. So gender socialization is the process through which children learn about what the society expects from them because of their being a boy or a girl. That is, what is the attitude of the society towards boys and towards girls, and what are the behaviors that are expected from boys and girls or men and women in that society. For example, in a particular society, women might be always expected to wear a ghungat, and women might be expected to be always in charge of the kitchen. Therefore, children are learning these different attitudes and expectations through various social interactions or various sources. So these various sources can be parents. They are looking at their parents and learning what their mother is doing, how their mother is behaving, what their father is doing, what the father is behaving like. Therefore, children can learn from their parents, from their peers, from the media, from the teachers, and from the community that they interact with. So this is gender socialization, where children are learning about the expectations of the society towards a particular gender through these various social interactions. Let us now talk about the concept of gender roles. Now, what are gender roles? These are nothing but socially constructed roles. That is, this is the society's expectation with regards to the behaviors, the activities, the attributes, or the professions that are considered to be appropriate or ideal for men and women. A small example could be gender role typing in the Indian film industry in the early 1900s. When the film industry was just developing in India, women were not considered for any roles in movies. In fact, women were almost prohibited from participating in the movie making process. So for many years, all the parts, including the female parts in movies, were played by men. And gender roles evolve over a period of time as the society changes and develops and evolves. So even in the film industry, in the 1940s or the 1950s, once the industry became more developed, that's when women started participating actively in the movie industry. So this is an example of how gender roles are expectations of the society and they evolve or develop over a period of time. Even now, there are some gender roles which are prevalent. For example, when I say the word soldier or engineer, then you immediately think of men. And when I say the words teacher or nurse, then you immediately think of women. This is an example how gender roles are prevalent even in today's society. Next, let us talk about the concepts of gender, prejudice, bias, and discrimination, and what is the connection between these 3 terms. Prejudice is a strong preference, that is, it can be a liking or a dislike without a good reason. Some examples can be some people like dogs, some people like cats. There might be no real reason behind why they like dogs or why they dislike dogs or why they like cats or dislike cats, but they have a strong preference or a liking or a dislike. So similarly, in some countries, there might be a prejudice for or against Asians or Indians or Chinese. And in India, there can be prejudices against North Indians or against South Indians for no valid reason. And prejudices can be for or against gender as well. Now this prejudice, that is the strong preference, liking or dislike, right, can result in bias or it can result in discrimination. If somebody is unconsciously acting on this prejudice, in a sense, a manager might think that he or she is actually being very fair and is following a proper process. But if you look at the data, the manager might be selecting only male employees as compared to female employees. So this might be unconscious. In a sense, the manager is not doing it on purpose. This is just happening because of the prejudice that exists in that person's mind. So gender bias is the tendency to select or prefer one gender over the other unconsciously. Whereas gender discrimination is conscious, deliberate or explicit. That is, the person is purposefully discriminating against one gender or the other because of the prejudice. So bias is unconscious and discrimination is conscious or deliberate. Now, where can this bias or discrimination happen? Well, it can happen at birth. For example, female infanticide is nothing but an example of gender discrimination. It can happen in education, where Some parents prefer to spend more money on the education of boys rather than girls. So this can be bias or this can be discrimination. It can be in employment where men probably get more opportunities than women because managers are consciously or unconsciously selecting one gender over the other. So this can be bias or discrimination. It can be in wages or salaries where women are generally paid a little less than men. And it can be in opportunities where men get more opportunities than women. So prejudice leads to bias and discrimination. So what is gender inequality? A person is born as a male or a female. So the sex of the person is a biological construct. Because a person is born as a male or a female, the society designates the person as a man or woman. So gender is a social construct. And from the time we are children, we learn about gender roles. That is, what kind of expectations the society has from a particular gender. What is the kind of work that they should do, how they should behave, they should wear. So we learn about these various gender roles through gender socialization. That is, when we interact with our family, with our peers, with our teachers, with our community, with the media, we learn about these various expectations that the society has from each of these genders. And we also develop some stereotypes. For example, when you say the word nurse, you immediately think of a woman. When you say soldier, you immediately think of a man. So these are the stereotypes that we have built in our mind. And because of these gender roles that we have learned, or the stereotypes that we have built, we might have a gender prejudice in our mind as well. So gender prejudice is nothing but a preference or a liking or a dislike of a particular gender without a valid reason. Now, because of this prejudice, if we act in a positive or a negative way towards a specific gender, that can be either bias or discrimination. If we are acting in a positive or a negative way towards a gender consciously, intentionally, that is discrimination. If we are doing so without actually intending to do so, that is unintentional, or it is just subconscious or unconscious, then that is bias. And this bias or discrimination towards a specific gender leads to inequality. So gender inequality is nothing but the social phenomena in which men and women are not treated equally. Is there gender inequality in India? Yes, there is. If you look at the 2011 census, there are 943 females for every 1,000 males. So which means that the ratio between males and females in India is roughly 1:1 or 50-50. And if you look at the literacy rate, right, men have a 80.9% literacy rate, whereas women have 64.6%, which means that there are more illiterate women than men. So why is that? So this can be because of gender bias or gender discrimination. And if you look at the proportion of seats held by women in national parliament, right? So just around 14% of the seats are held by women and the remaining are held by men, which means that women are not equally represented in the parliament. And if you look at the proportion of women in the local governmental bodies, there things are a little better because women hold around 44.4% of the seats and the remaining is men. This is probably because there is a reservation for women at a local level. And if you look at the proportion of women in managerial positions, just around 14% of the managerial positions are held by women. So the remaining are held by men. And if you look at the proportion of women in senior and middle management positions, that is also just a little over 14% and the remaining are held by men. So if the proportion of men and women in India is 1:1, then all of these parameters should have been equal. But we can see that men clearly have an advantage. And that is an indication of gender inequality in India, where men and women are not treated equally or they don't have access to the same kind of opportunities. The two other terms that you may see in some of the questions are gender equality and gender equity. Equality means that you are giving all children, irrespective of whether they are male or female, you are giving them the same resources and the same kind of opportunities. Whereas gender equity means that you recognize that every child has a different circumstance and you are giving as many resources and opportunities as required to make sure that they reach the same outcome or an equal outcome. So equality is process focused or resource focused, whereas equity is outcome focused or result focused. For example, in gender equality, you are giving all children the same kind of facilities or resources, but it is not going to happen that they all reach the same result. Whereas if you focus on gender equity, you are more focused on making sure that all children reach the same result, and you are going to give them as many opportunities or as many resources as required to make sure that they reach these results. So equality is resource focused and equity is result focused. Now let us look at some examples of how gender bias or gender discrimination can exist in the classroom. A teacher may always say that I treat all my students equally, but there may be difference in how the teacher is treating boys versus treating girls. If boys are mischievous or noisy in the classroom, the expectation may be that boys will be boys. They will be noisy and they will be mischievous, whereas the expectation from girls may be that they will be well behaved and always obedient in the classroom. And boys may be expected to study hard and pursue a career, whereas girls may not have to pursue a career because the expectation is that they will grow up and get married and go away. And boys may be sent for higher studies to other cities, towns, or maybe even other countries, whereas the expectation from girls may be that they will always stay closer to home. And boys are expected to be emotionally strong in dealing with all the issues that they face in the classroom and outside, whereas the stereotype may be that girls are emotionally weak. And boys may be expected to take up maths and science and pursue careers like engineering or medicine, whereas the stereotype may be that girls are weak in math and science, therefore they are expected to take up easier subjects. And boys may be getting extra attention in the classroom and outside, whereas girls may not be getting the extra attention that they require. And in some families, education of boys is considered to be an investment because the idea is that they will grow up and take care of their parents, whereas the education of girls may be considered to be an expense. So these are all some examples of how bias and discrimination may exist in the classroom. Now let us see how gender bias and discrimination can be addressed in the classroom. The first step is to recognize that there is a problem. Unless you accept that there is discrimination and bias that exists in the classroom, you'll not be able to solve the problem. So the first step to solving any problem is to recognize and accept that there is a problem. Next, you have to train the teachers to recognize bias and discrimination. It can be in their own behavior or actions, or in the behavior or actions of the students or others. So teachers have to be trained to identify such bias and discrimination. And we should avoid gender stereotypes in the classroom. For example, boys don't cry or girls can't go out alone. So such stereotypes should be avoided. And the practice of separating girls and boys, that is, girls should sit on this side of the classroom, boys should sit on the other side of the classroom. So such separation should be avoided. And all the activities should be of mixed type. In a sense, there should be no girls only activities or boys only activities in the classroom. And the play material that is provided to young children should not be stereotyped. That is, when you are buying toys for girls, it should not be only Barbie dolls or other dolls for girls and you buy toys like cars or guns for boys. So such stereotyping in toys should also be avoided, because there is no reason why girls can't play with cars and guns and why boys cannot play with Barbie dolls or other dolls. And girls should be given equal opportunities to lead in the classroom. It might be as a class lead or a monitor. So girls should be given equal opportunities. And you should make use of the terms she and he equally in learning activities, especially when we are making any references or giving examples or illustrations. So there should be a conscious use of both the genders. And we should avoid stereotypes such as soldiers are men, or we should avoid the stereotypes like nurses are women, or only men can be pilots. So such biased opinions should be avoided. And we should expose students to strong role models. And this is something that you will see in many subjects like EVS. For example, in EVS, there are specific chapters devoted to women achievers like Sunita Williams, who is an astronaut. So such examples will expose students to a wider world, right? And the opportunities that are available for both men and women. And children should also be taught about what are these gender bias and discrimination and how they should recognize it, and they should be encouraged to question such stereotypes. So if girls are told that they should not be doing a particular type of activity or they should not be pursuing a particular career, they should be encouraged to question that. So these are some of the ways in which gender bias and discrimination can be addressed in the classroom. Next, let us solve some sample questions from previous question papers. A school gives preference to girls while preparing students for state level solo song competition. This reflects which of the following? Now here there is a clear indication of gender bias, because there might be an assumption that when it comes to singing, right, only girls can participate in such activities. Therefore, there seems to be gender bias that is happening here. In order to avoid gender stereotyping in the classroom, a teacher should do which of the following? Now, in questions like this, very often there can be more than one correct answer. So we have to choose which is the best answer among the given options. Now, what is stereotyping? Stereotyping is an expectation that girls should do a particular type of job or particular type of activities, and boys should participate only in particular type of jobs or activities. So to avoid such stereotyping, if we put both boys and girls in non-traditional roles, in the sense, if you put boys in cooking classes, it gives boys an idea as to what happens in the kitchen, how to cook things, and if you put girls into activities which are traditionally meant for boys, it gives them also an equal opportunity to experience new things. Therefore, by putting boys and girls in non-traditional roles, that is non-stereotyped roles, you are avoiding gender stereotyping in the classroom. So option 2 is the best answer. In this question, we have been given 4 statements about gender discrimination in the classroom. So we have to identify which of these statements is correct. Now, the first statement says does not affect the performance of the students. This is incorrect, because if you are discriminating between the students, which means that some students will be discouraged, and this will definitely affect their performance. Therefore, does not affect makes this an incorrect statement. Statement 2 says may lead to diminished effort or performance of the students. This statement is correct, because if you are discriminating, some students may feel discouraged and this will affect their performance. Therefore, it will lead to diminished effort in the performance. Therefore, this is correct. Next, may lead to enhanced effort or performance of the male students. This is incorrect, because just because you are discriminating against the girls in the classroom, it doesn't mean that the performance of the male students will increase or get better. Therefore, this is incorrect. And it is done more by male teachers than female counterparts. This again is incorrect, because discrimination or bias can be on the part of the male teachers or the female teachers. Therefore, the statement itself is an example of bias. Therefore, option 2 is the correct answer. A teacher remarks in a co-education class to boys, "Be boys, don't behave like girls." This remark is an example of which of the following? Now, is it caste discrimination? There is no mention of caste here. We are talking about gender discrimination here between boys and girls. Therefore, this is incorrect. Next, it is a good example of dealing with boys and girls. Now, if you are saying boys should behave like boys and not like girls, so this is an example of stereotyped or biased behavior, right? So this is not a good example. Therefore, this is also incorrect. Statement 3 reflects stereotypical behavior of discrimination between boys and girls. This is a correct statement, because the teacher is expecting boys to behave in a particular way and girls to behave in a particular way. So that is stereotyping. Therefore, it reflects stereotypical behavior. And the last one highlights the biological superiority of boys over girls. Now, there is no scientific proof to say that boys are superior to girls. So this statement itself is incorrect. Therefore, option 3 is the correct answer here. Sex refers to the biological attributes of being male or female, while gender refers to which of the following? So there are 4 long statements that are given in the options, but we have to remember that the answer is quite simple. We have seen this multiple times in this video, that sex is a biological construct and gender is a social construct. Therefore, look at all the 4 options. Option 2 says that gender is the socially constructed attributes of being male or female, or of femininity or masculinity. Therefore, option 2 is the correct answer, because gender is a social construct. And with that, we come to the end of this video. If you have any questions or feedback, please put them in the comment section below, and the rest you know what to do. So I will see you again very soon in the next edition of this video series. Till then, take care, stay safe.